My name is Daniel, and for most of my adult life I've lived with schizophrenia. I've learned how to manage it. Therapy, medication, routines that keep my thoughts grounded. For years I had been stable, quiet, functional. I finally felt like I was living instead of surviving. That peace ended the moment my sister-in-law moved into our house. Her name is Nadia. At first I told myself I was being paranoid. Nadia was Clara's younger sister, recently divorced, struggling financially. Taking her in felt like the right thing to do. Clara insisted it was temporary, just until Nadia got back on her feet. I agreed because I loved my wife, and because I genuinely believed I could handle it. For the first few weeks, nothing felt wrong. Nadia kept mostly to herself, stayed in the guest room, helped around the house. She was quiet, almost too quiet, but I didn't think much of it. I've always been sensitive to sound, so I assumed that was on me. Then the whispers started. First they were faint. So faint that I couldn't even be sure they were real. It would happen when Nadia was nearby, passing me in the hallway, standing in the kitchen while I washed dishes, lingering behind me when I sat on the couch. I'd hear something soft and breathy, just on the edge of hearing. Every time I turned to ask what she said, she looked startled. "Oh, nothing," she'd say quickly. "Are you okay?" That question always landed wrong. I noticed something else too. The voices, my old symptoms, had been gone for a long time. Month, maybe longer. But suddenly they were back. And strangely, they only appeared when Nadia was around. When she left the house, everything went quiet again. I told myself it was coincidence. Relapse. But deep down something felt off. Weeks passed, and the whispers became more frequent. Still unclear, still just fragments, but constant enough that I started bracing myself whenever Nadia entered a room. I began sleeping poorly, replaying the sounds in my head, wondering if I was imagining them or missing something obvious. The first breakdown happened late one night. I lay in bed beside Clara, silently crying, staring at the ceiling. I kept repeating the same thought over and over. It's her. It's not me. I'm not losing my mind. But the harder I tried to convince myself, the more uncertain I felt. When it happened again just weeks later, a second breakdown, I knew I couldn't keep this to myself. I told Clara everything. I explained the whispers, how they only happened around Nadia, how they felt different from my past hallucinations. Too natural, too consistent. Clara listened, but her expression wasn't what I hoped for. She wasn't angry. She was worried. Not about her sister, but about me. She took my hands and told me gently that schizophrenia can resurface under stress. That voices can return even when you think you're stable. She reassured me that Nadia would never intentionally harm me. Her words were meant to comfort me. Instead, they made everything worse. If Nadia wasn't doing this, then what did that say about me? I started watching Nadia more closely. I noticed how she sometimes muttered under her breath when she thought no one was paying attention. How she'd pause in doorways, lost in thought. How her lips moved even when no sound came out. I tried listening harder, too hard, straining to catch clear words that would prove I wasn't imagining things. But the more I focused, the less sense it all made. Just fragments of sounds. Nothing solid. Clara grew frustrated as I withdrew further into myself. I stopped engaging in conversations. I avoided common areas when Nadia was home. Still, I took my medication exactly as prescribed. I kept my psychiatrist appointments. I did everything right. And yet, the whispers didn't stop. Each medication adjustment brought brief hope, followed by crushing disappointment. Every time the murmurs returned, my certainty grew stronger. This wasn't my illness. Someone was doing this to me on purpose. And I was starting to believe that Nadia wasn't just staying in our house. She was trying to break me inside it. But the moment I finally confronted Nadia about the whispers, everything spiraled completely out of control. By the time I reached my breaking point, the tension in our house had become unbearable. Every sound felt amplified. Every quiet moment carried weight. I could feel Nadia's presence even when she wasn't in the room, like the air shifted whenever she walked past me. I hated that feeling, the constant alertness, the way my body stayed tense as if preparing for something I couldn't see. Clara noticed the change in me long before I admitted how bad it had become. She tried to be patient, reminding me to take breaks, encouraging me to lean on my coping strategies. But from her perspective, I was becoming obsessed. She believed I was fixating on her sister as a way to make sense of symptoms I didn't want to accept. And maybe part of me feared that she was right. Still, I couldn't ignore what I was hearing. One evening, while walking down the hallway, I heard it, clearer than ever before. A whisper. Not vague. Not imagined. It was unmistakably coming from Nadia's direction. My heart slammed against my ribs. I followed the sound into the kitchen, adrenaline flooding my system. Nadia stood at the counter, holding a glass of water, her back partially turned toward me. She looked completely calm, as if nothing had happened. Something inside me snapped. I demanded she stop pretending. I told her I knew she'd been whispering at me for months. My voice shook as I asked why she was doing it, what she hoped to gain by pushing me like this. She stared at me like I'd just accused her of a crime she couldn't comprehend. Then she started crying. Not quiet tears, full, trembling sobs. She dropped the glass in the sink, covered her face, and rushed past me out the front door. The slam echoed through the house like a gunshot. The instant regret hit me, but it was drowned out by panic. I knew what would happen next. Nadia would call Clara. Clara was still at work, and she hated getting emotional phone calls in the middle of her shift. My chest tightened as I imagined what Nadia might tell her. If she could lie about the whispers, what else would she lie about? Nadia didn't return until Clara's car pulled into the driveway that evening. I sat frozen on the couch, my thoughts racing, my heartbeat refusing to slow. When Clara walked inside, her face looked tired and conflicted. She didn't yell. That somehow hurt more. She told me she was struggling to understand what was happening. I tried to explain my side, but she asked me to let her finish. She said it broke her heart to see me in pain, but hearing such serious accusations against her sister was devastating too. She admitted she didn't know who to believe, but that she feared my illness might be misleading us both. As she spoke, Nadia stood behind her, quietly crying, nodding along. I couldn't believe it. The way Nadia leaned into the role, the way she looked so fragile, it felt rehearsed, calculated. I wanted to scream to expose the lie, but I knew if I spoke in that moment, it would only come out as rage. So I stayed silent. I told Clara we could talk later. That night I barely slept. The next day, once I had calmed down, I tried again. I explained how deeply the whispers were affecting me, how real they felt, how different they were from my past experiences. Clara listened, but her conclusion crushed me. She said this was bigger than us. She suggested I needed more intensive care. Maybe even hospitalization. The word ward echoed in my head like a sentence. Felt like abandonment. I argued. She argued back. Neither of us was willing to back down, and the fight spiraled into something ugly. Eventually I shut down completely. But I wasn't done. If words wouldn't convince her, I needed something else. Proof. Over the next few days I watched Nadia carefully, but quietly. I didn't confront her. I didn't accuse her. I just observed. Most of the time she seemed normal. Too normal. But sometimes, she slipped. She'd mutter to herself while cooking. Pause mid-step as if listening to something no one else could hear. Move her lips without sound. Every time it happened, I prayed Clara was nearby. I never pointed it out. I just waited. And slowly, I noticed something shift. Clara started noticing too. Her skepticism faded as she caught these moments on her own. Pauses. The murmurs. The strange silences. I could see doubt creeping into her expression. That's when I knew. If I was going to prove the truth, I had to go further. So I started recording. Rehook. What I accidentally captured on my phone days later would change everything. And prove I was never imagining the whispers at all. I never wanted to become someone who secretly recorded another person. The idea made my stomach turn. I wasn't trying to spy on Nadia or trap her in some cruel gotcha moment. All I needed was something concrete. Something real that could cut through the doubt that hung over everything I said. At first, the recordings were subtle. Unremarkable even. A short clip of Nadia standing at the stove, quietly muttering while stirring a pot. Another where she stopped mid-sentence during a conversation, staring at nothing for several seconds before continuing like nothing happened. A third where her lips moved, but no sound came out. On their own they didn't prove much. But together they painted a picture, one that matched everything I had been experiencing. Clara didn't know I was recording yet. I wanted to be absolutely sure before I showed her anything. The risk of being wrong felt unbearable. If I confronted her without undeniable proof, I feared I'd lose her trust for good. The whispers, meanwhile, grew more aggressive. They followed me room to room, always strongest when Nadia was close. I felt like I was being hunted in my own home, pushed closer to the edge every day. The house stopped feeling safe. Even silence felt threatening. One evening, after an especially exhausting day, I retreated to the bathroom just to breathe. I turned on the sink, splashed cold water on my face, and leaned against the counter, trying to steady my thoughts. My phone was in my hand. I'd been reviewing clips earlier, and without thinking I set it down on the counter. Kept recording. I sat on the edge of the tub, staring at the floor, trying to block out the whispers that had already started creeping in again. They felt closer this time. More deliberate. My chest tightened. I focused on the sound, desperate to catch actual words, but it was still frustratingly unclear. Just breathy murmurs, sliding in and out of perception. After several minutes, I gave up and left the bathroom. The moment I stepped into the hallway, the whispers stopped. Just like that. I returned later, turned off my phone, and didn't think much of it. Until that night. I lay awake in bed, unable to sleep, my mind spinning. On impulse, out of pure desperation, I opened the video from the bathroom. First it was nothing. Just me sitting in silence. The hum of the house. The faint sound of pipes. Then the bathroom door creaked. Froze. The sound was subtle, but unmistakable. The door moved slightly. Slow enough to be deliberate. Then the whispers began again. This time they were clear. Clear enough that my blood ran cold. It was Nadia's voice. Low. Controlled. Right outside the door. I sat upright in bed, replaying the clip over and over, my hands shaking. There was no mistaking it. No room for interpretation. No chance it was my illness. Someone else was there. Someone had been whispering to me on purpose. The realization hit like a physical blow. I wasn't losing my mind. I never had been. All those months of doubt, of fear, of being told my illness was responsible. Every second of it had been manipulated. Someone I trusted had been deliberately pushing me toward breakdown. Felt sick. But alongside the fear and anger came something else. Relief. Finally had proof. Over the next few days I became more careful. More methodical. I continued recording, capturing more moments of Nadia's strange behavior. Quiet muttering in the kitchen, sudden pauses in the hallway, her lips moving when she thought she was alone. Each clip reinforced the truth. When I finally felt ready, I sat Clara down. My heart pounded as I handed her my phone. I didn't explain. I didn't argue. I just told her to watch. Her expression changed slowly as the videos played. Confusion giving way to concern, concern turning into shock. Her face drained of color when the bathroom recording played. She rewound it. Listened again. Then again. Neither of us spoke. When she finally looked at me, her eyes were filled with something I hadn't seen in a long time. Belief. We didn't argue. We didn't debate. We just sat there, letting the truth settle between us. That night we made a decision together. We were going to confront Nadia. And no matter what she said, this time she wouldn't be able to lie her way out of it. But when Nadia finally confessed, the reason behind her cruelty was more disturbing than I ever expected. The next evening felt heavier than any moment I could remember. Dinner passed in strained silence. Nadia chatted casually, laughing at things Clara said, completely unaware, or pretending to be, that her time in our house was about to end. Every time she smiled, I felt a knot tighten in my chest. After we finished eating, Clara asked Nadia to sit with us in the living room. Her tone was calm. Come. Nadia's expression flickered with uncertainty as she took a seat across from us. I could tell she sensed something was wrong. Her hands folded and unfolded in her lap, fingers fidgeting as she waited. Clara started gently. She said we'd noticed some unusual behaviors lately and wanted to talk openly about them. Nadia nodded quickly, playing the role of concern, her eyes darting between us. That's when I placed my phone on the coffee table. I didn't say a word. I just pressed play. The first video showed Nadia in the kitchen, muttering softly to herself. She tried to laugh it off at first, brushing it aside as stress. But as the next clips played, her pausing mid-motion, her lips moving without sound, her confidence faded. Then came the bathroom recording. The room went completely still. Nadia's face drained of color as her own whisper filled the space between us. She stared at the screen, frozen, like she couldn't believe the evidence existed. Her hands began to shake. Clara turned to her, voice tight. "Explain this." For a moment Nadia said nothing. Her eyes filled with tears, and her breathing became shallow. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. She admitted it. All of it. She confessed that she had whispered outside the bathroom door. In the hallway. In the kitchen. Every time she knew I was alone or vulnerable. She said she never meant for it to go this far. But she'd lost control. Clara demanded to know why. At first, Nadia tried to deflect, talking about stress, fear, misunderstanding. But Clara didn't let her escape. Her patience snapped, and for the first time, I saw her anger directed fully at her sister. "Why would you do this to him?" she asked. "Do you have any idea what you put him through?" Nadia broke down completely. She confessed that she was afraid of me. She said she'd read stories online, articles, forums, people talking about schizophrenia like it was a ticking time bomb. She convinced herself that living in the same house as me was dangerous, that I might snap one day, that I might hurt someone without realizing it. Instead of talking to us, she chose another path. She believed that if she could push me into seeking more serious help, or force me out of the house, she would be safer. The whispers, the muttering, the strange behavior. It was all deliberate. A twisted attempt to protect herself. The words felt unreal. I sat there, stunned, as the truth settled in. She hadn't done it out of hatred. She'd done it out of fear. But fear didn't erase the damage. Clara was shaking. Her voice wavered as she told Nadia how deeply she'd betrayed us. How she'd exploited my illness instead of trying to understand it. She explained the sleepless nights, the breakdowns, the constant fear she'd watched me endure. "You broke our trust," Clara said. "And you hurt the person I love." Nadia cried harder, apologizing over and over. She said she didn't realize how bad it had gotten. She claimed she thought I'd eventually get help, and everything would be fine. She promised to seek therapy, to make things right, change. But something had already shattered beyond repair. When the room finally fell quiet, Clara and I exchanged a look. We both knew what had to happen. That night, after Nadia went to her room, Clara told me we needed to make a difficult decision. One that would hurt, but one we couldn't avoid. Our home had stopped being safe. And tomorrow, everything was going to change. The next morning we told Nadia she had to leave, and her reaction was more explosive than either of us expected. The next morning, the house felt unnaturally quiet. No whispered sounds. No tension humming beneath the walls. Just an uneasy stillness that made my stomach churn. Clara barely slept, and neither had I. We both knew the conversation ahead would change our family forever. Clara asked Nadia to join us in the living room after breakfast. Nadia walked in slowly, her shoulders stiff, her eyes already red and swollen. She looked like someone who had spent the night crying or rehearsing. I couldn't tell which. Clara spoke first. She kept her voice calm, but I could hear the strain beneath it. She explained that what Nadia had done had caused deep harm, emotionally and mentally. That our home had become a place of fear instead of safety. That trust, once broken this severely, couldn't simply be repaired with apologies. Then she said the words I knew were coming. Nadia couldn't stay with us anymore. For a moment, Nadia just stared at her, like she hadn't understood. Then her expression shifted, confusion giving way to disbelief turning into rage. Her voice rose as she accused us of abandoning her. She said we were using her as a scapegoat, blaming her for things that would have happened anyway. She compared us to her ex-boyfriend, claiming everyone always threw her away when things got difficult. Clara stayed seated, hands clasped tightly in her lap, forcing herself to remain steady. Nadia's anger escalated quickly. She insisted she had nowhere else to go, that we were her only family, that we were choosing me over blood. Every word felt like a blade aimed straight at Clara's heart. I stayed quiet. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I knew if I spoke, it would come out wrong. I understood fear. I even understood panic. But nothing justified what she'd done. Clara finally told her the truth. "This isn't punishment," she said softly. "It's about safety. For all of us." That only made Nadia angrier. She accused us of exaggerating, of turning her into a villain. She claimed she was the real victim, that she'd been forced to live in constant fear because of my diagnosis. That was when something inside me broke. I stood up, not shouting, not threatening, but firm. I told her she had crossed a line. That my illness was not a weapon to be used against me. That what she'd done had pushed me toward hospitalization and nearly destroyed my marriage. For the first time, Nadia went silent. She stared at me with an expression I couldn't read. Anger, shame, something darker beneath it all. Eventually, she stormed off to her room to pack. The house filled with the sound of drawers slamming and suitcases being dragged across the floor. The tension was suffocating. Clara helped her pack, moving stiffly, speaking only when necessary. Their silence hurt more than shouting ever could. I stayed out of the way. I felt relief, pure, undeniable relief, that the nightmare was ending. But it was tangled with guilt. This was still Clara's sister. Still family. And now, that bond was being severed right in front of us. When Nadia finally came downstairs, bags in hand, the air felt heavy. Clara walked her to the door. She opened her arms for a hug. Nadia shoved her away. The rejection hit Clara hard, even though she tried not to show it. Nadia turned to me then, her eyes sharp, filled with something unresolved. She mouthed something, words I couldn't hear, but the message was clear. This wasn't over in her mind. Then she left. The door closed behind her with a finality that echoed through the house. Silence followed. Not the suffocating silence I'd grown used to, but something calmer, cleaner. For the first time in months, my chest loosened. But even as peace settled in, I couldn't shake the feeling that Nadia's final look meant something more. And I was right, because what happened after she left forced Clara and me to confront the last, hardest truth of all. After Nadia left, the house felt unfamiliar. Not empty, just different. Like a place that had finally exhaled after holding its breath for far too long. The silence no longer pressed against my ears or twisted my thoughts. Simply existed. And for the first time in months, it felt peaceful. Clara and I didn't talk much that first day. We moved through the house quietly, each of us processing the weight of what had happened. The loss of a sister. The end of trust. The realization that someone we loved had been capable of such cruelty. That night I waited. I expected the whispers to return. They didn't. No murmurs. No half-formed sounds. No breathy voices creeping in from the edges of my mind. I lay in bed, heart pounding, listening to the steady rhythm of the house. Nothing followed me into the dark. I cried, not from fear but from relief. The next morning I told Clara. I explained how quiet my mind felt. How the symptoms that had tormented me for months were suddenly gone. She sat beside me, her eyes filling with tears as the truth settled in. She apologized. Over and over. She told me she wished she'd trusted me sooner, that she hated herself for doubting my reality. I reminded her that doubt had been planted deliberately, that fear had been weaponized against both of us. Healing didn't happen instantly, but it began. We cut off all contact with Nadia. No calls, no texts, no updates through extended family. Clara needed space to grieve the sister she thought she had, and the one she'd lost. I returned to my psychiatrist, not to be hospitalized, but to rebuild. We reviewed everything that had happened, including the recordings. He confirmed what we now knew. My symptoms had been triggered externally, manipulated by sustained psychological stress. That validation mattered. Not because I needed to prove I was right, but because I needed to trust myself again. Over time, our home became ours again. We laughed more. We slept better. The fear that once clung to the walls faded, replaced by something softer, safer. But the experience changed me. I learned how easily someone's reality can be dismissed when mental illness is involved. How quickly fear turns into justification for cruelty. How dangerous it is when people decide they know better than the person living the experience. Most of all, I learned the importance of being believed. Clara and I grew stronger, not because we avoided hardship, but because we faced it together. We rebuilt trust brick by brick, choosing honesty even when it hurt. Sometimes late at night I still think about Nadia, about the final look she gave me, about the fear that drove her actions. I don't hate her, but I can't forgive what she did either. Some wounds don't heal by pretending they never happened. And that's okay. The house is quiet now. Truly quiet. And for the first time in a long time, so is my mind.